Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The morning my son served me with court papers, I was in the kitchen making oatmeal. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because I always watch the morning news on Tuesdays while I eat, and the weatherman was talking about a coming storm. I didn't know the storm had already arrived, wrapped in a manila envelope and delivered by a young process server who couldn't look me in the eye. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I am 67 years old, a retired civil engineer, a widower, and apparently, according to the lawsuit my son Marcus filed against me, a man who owes his child 600,000. Let me tell you how we got here, the beginning. A good life, a good son. Marcus was born in 1985, the year I got my first promotion at the engineering firm where I'd work for the next 30 years. His mother, Patricia, and I had been married for 4 years by then, and we had wanted children desperately. When he arrived, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, furious at the world and screaming to prove it, I wept in that hospital corridor in a way I had never wept before and have never wept since. Not even at Patricia's funeral, though that grief was deeper and darker than anything I have words for. We raised Marcus well. I say this not as a boast, but as context. We didn't spoil him, but we never let him want for anything essential. He went to good schools. We took family vacations. When he showed an interest in music, we bought him a guitar. When he shifted to basketball, we drove him to practice 3 nights a week for 6 years. When he got into college, a decent state university 2 hours away, we paid his tuition in full and sent him a monthly allowance that I now realize was too generous. Marcus graduated with a business degree and moved back home for 2 years while he found his footing. I didn't mind. The house was quiet since Patricia passed, and having him there reminded me that life still had texture and noise and purpose. Those were good years, the last truly uncomplicated years between us. He met Vanessa at 28. She was beautiful, ambitious, and had a vision for her life that was so detailed it sometimes reminded me of an architect's blueprint. That's not a criticism, I admired her drive. But I noticed early on that her vision and Marcus's contentment were not always perfectly aligned, and that when they clashed, it was always Marcus's contentment that gave way. They married in 2015. I gave them $25,000 as a wedding gift, everything I could spare at the time without touching my retirement fund. I thought it was generous. Vanessa thanked me warmly at the reception. Marcus hugged me and said, "Thanks, Dad." That was enough, that was more than enough. The request the trouble started in the spring of 2022. Marcus called me on a Sunday afternoon, not unusual, we spoke most Sundays, but his voice had a particular quality that I recognized from his teenage years. It was the voice he used when he wanted something significant and was building toward it carefully, laying groundwork the way you'd lay track before a train arrives. We talked about the weather. We talked about the NBA playoffs. He asked how my knee was feeling. Then he said casually, as though the thought had just occurred to him, "Dad, Vanessa and I have been looking at houses." I told him that was exciting. "There's one we love," he said. "It's perfect, honestly, 4 bedrooms, big yard for the kids, good school district." Vanessa fell in love with it the moment we walked in. I said it sounded wonderful and asked where it was. He told me. It was in one of the newer developments on the north side of the county. Large homes, manicured lawns, the kind of neighborhood where every garage has a basketball hoop and every driveway has an SUV. Nice, but unquestionably beyond what a 36-year-old middle manager and his interior designer wife should reasonably be stretching toward. Then he told me the price. $740,000 was quiet for a moment. I asked if he and Vanessa had been pre-approved for financing. "That's the thing, Dad," he said. "The mortgage payments are manageable if we have a good down payment. We've saved about $80,000 ourselves, but we need $300,000 to make the numbers work comfortably." $300,000. I let the number sit between us on the phone line for a long moment. I want to be clear about my financial situation because it matters to this story. When Patricia died in 2019, I inherited her modest life insurance policy, $180,000, which I placed into a fund I mentally designated for end-of-life expenses. My retirement savings, built over 30 years of disciplined living, totaled roughly $620,000. I own my home outright. By most measures, I was comfortable. But I was 63 years old, facing perhaps 25 more years of living expenses, potential medical costs, and the creeping uncertainty that haunts every retiree who watches the news. $300,000 was not money I could give away and remain secure. It was not money I could give away at all. I told Marcus this as gently as I knew how. I told him I loved him. I told him I was proud of everything he had built. I told him that $740,000 was a lot of house, and perhaps they might find something equally wonderful at a lower price point. I reminded him that I had paid for his education, given generously at his wedding, and helped him twice before when unexpected expenses arose. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I understand, Dad," in a tone that told me he absolutely did not. The shift after that phone call, something changed between us. It didn't happen all at once. Marcus still called on Sundays, but the calls grew shorter. When I visited for Thanksgiving that year, Vanessa was polite but distant in a way she had never been before. My grandchildren, their two boys, aged 6 and 4, were loud and wonderful and blissfully unaware of the cold draft that had entered the adult world above their heads. Marcus and I took a walk after dinner, the way we used to when he was a teenager and needed to talk about things he couldn't say sitting still. He told me that they had put in an offer on the house anyway, stretching their financing to its limit. I told him I hoped it worked out. He said, "It would have been easier with your help." I said, "I know, I'm sorry I wasn't able." He nodded and we walked back to the house in silence. In March of 2023, I learned through my nephew Marcus's cousin that Marcus and Vanessa had been telling family members that I had refused to help them, and that I was sitting on money I'd never spend. I heard that Vanessa had told her mother that I was selfish, that I valued my bank account more than my grandchildren's future. I called Marcus and told him what I'd heard. He didn't deny it entirely. He said people were entitled to their opinions. I told him that spreading grievances about me to relatives was hurtful and unfair. The call ended badly, the first real argument we'd had in years, voices raised. Words not quite crossed but leaning dangerously in that direction. I sat by the phone for a long time after. I thought about Patricia and what she would have said. I think she would have told me to give him the money and not look back. She was always more generous than I was, more willing to sacrifice her own security for the people she loved. But Patricia was also not here to help me recover if something went wrong with my health or my finances in the years ahead. Patricia had left me alone to navigate the arithmetic of aging, and I had to do it carefully. The lawsuit, the envelope, arrived 14 months later. I will not pretend I understood everything in it immediately. Legal documents have a language designed, I sometimes think, specifically to delay comprehension. I called my neighbor Harold, who had been a real estate attorney before he retired, and asked him to come over and read it with me. Harold read it twice. Then he looked up at me over his reading glasses and said, "Gerald, your son is claiming you verbally promised him $300,000 toward the purchase of his home, then failed to deliver on that promise, causing him financial harm. He's seeking $600,000, double the original amount, citing emotional distress and consequential damages." I told Harold that I had made no such promise. Harold said, "Then we need a lawyer." The claim, as I came to understand it through my attorney, a patient woman named Sandra who specialized in family law disputes, rested on a theory that a conversation I'd allegedly had with Marcus and Vanessa in late 2021, before the formal request, constituted a verbal contract. Marcus claimed that at a dinner at his home I had said something to the effect of, "When you two find the right house, I'll help make it happen." Have no memory of saying those words. I may have said something vaguely encouraging. I often did because I wanted them to be happy, because that is what parents do. But encouraging language over dinner wine is not a contract. Hope is not a promissory note. Vanessa, it turned out, had written a note in her personal journal the night of that dinner. The note read, "G said he would help with the house." Finally, my attorney told me this would be presented as corroborating evidence. I sat with that for a long time. My daughter-in-law had written down her interpretation of an optimistic, offhand remark by her father-in-law at a family dinner. And 3 years later, that note was being used to justify a lawsuit for $600,000. The proceedings, the months that followed, were among the most disorienting of my life. I am a man who has always trusted in order and fairness. I spent 30 years designing infrastructure, bridges, drainage systems, highway interchanges, work that required precision and the understanding that if you built something incorrectly, people could get hurt. I believed in doing things right. I believed the world, by and large, rewarded people who did. Sitting in a courthouse across a conference table from my own son, with lawyers between us like referees, rearranged something fundamental in how I understood the world. Marcus looked uncomfortable during the mediation sessions, less certain than Vanessa, who sat very straight and spoke in clipped, practiced sentences. I wondered, watching him, how much of this had been his initiative and how much had been encouraged by his wife. I told myself it didn't matter. He was an adult. He had signed the papers. Whatever the origin of the decision, he had made it. There was one moment during our second mediation session when Marcus and I found ourselves briefly alone in a hallway while our attorneys stepped away to confer. We stood there in fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly ill, and I looked at my son, my boy, who I had wept over in a hospital corridor, who I had driven to basketball practice, who had fallen asleep on my shoulder on a dozen long car trips, and I said, "Marcus, do you really want to do this?" He looked at the floor. He said, "Dad, we lost a lot of money on that house." I said, "I know, I'm sorry about that, but I never promised you 300,000. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then the lawyers came back and we took our seats and the mediation resumed. The outcome, the case was eventually settled out of court. I will not disclose the full terms. My attorney advised against it, and frankly, I have no desire to revisit those numbers on the page. What I will say is that I did not pay $600,000, and I did not pay $300,000. I paid significantly less, and I paid it not because I believed I owed it, but because Sandra told me that the cost of going to trial in legal fees, time, stress, and the irreversible spectacle of a father and son destroying each other under oath in a public courtroom outweighed the cost of resolution. So I wrote a check. I signed a document. I went home to my quiet house and sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for a very long time. What I know now, people who hear this story almost always ask me the same question. Do you regret not giving him the money in the first place? It is a fair question, and I have thought about it more than I care to admit. My honest answer is this: I do not regret protecting my financial security. I was right to consider my own future, my medical needs, my mortality, the arithmetic of a retirement that could last another 20 years. No parent is obligated to impoverish themselves for an adult child's real estate ambitions, but I do wonder late at night, in the particular silence of a house where someone you loved used to breathe, whether I communicated my love clearly enough alongside my refusal. Whether Marcus, somewhere in the architecture of his heart, heard "I won't give you the money" and translated it over time into "I don't love you enough." I wonder whether Vanessa filled that gap with resentment, and whether Marcus, wanting to be a good husband, let her. I don't know, I may never know. What I know is that my grandchildren are growing up in a world where their father sued their grandfather, and someday they will be old enough to ask why. What I know is that Marcus and I speak rarely now, politely, carefully, the way two people speak when they are standing near the edge of something and don't want to fall. What I know is that Patricia would have found a way to hold all of this together, and that her absence is a wound I carry quietly into every room. A final word: I am not writing this for sympathy. I am writing it because I think this story is more common than people admit. The slow combustion that happens when family and money occupy the same space, when love and expectation become entangled, when adult children and aging parents collide over the question of what we owe each other. There is no clean answer to that question. There is only the ongoing work of speaking honestly, loving stubbornly, and refusing to let money become the language through which a family says things it means to say differently. I failed at some of that work. So did Marcus. We are both still here. There is still time. I have to believe that. The names in this account have been changed. This story reflects one man's experience and is not intended as legal advice.